When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back, and this is episode 135, Creating a Browser for Developers with Kilian Valkhof. I'm Matt, that's Mike, and this week, like I just said, we have Kilian Valkhof on the podcast to talk about Polypain, a browser made for developers. So it should interest a bunch of you out there. Now, if this sounds interesting to you and you want to support the show, you can go check us out on that Patreon, leave a review or rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or just straight up share this with your friends. And I also have a note in here about once again, the weekly goals public Trello. Go check that out. The link is somewhere on our Twitter. Yes, I know that's not helpful. Somewhere on our Twitter. And if you're listening to this in the far future, I don't know what the status of it is. I just realized that that's probably, like, some people are going to be like, what? Like, what are you talking about? But anyway, Mike is working away on that, so you can go and check out his progress on the Weekly Goals app on that public Trello board. Now, today, we'll be talking, as I said, with Kilian Valkhof, a front-end developer, user experience designer, and generalist. He builds tools for developers and designers and likes to write about his development process, design tools, and accessibility. He's recently created a browser for developers called Polypain, which shows the developer how their website will look on multiple screen sizes at the same time. It packs in other great features, but let's just jump into our interview here, where we will discuss the project in detail, as well as a little bit about SaaS, or software as a service, as well. All right, everyone, we have Kilian Valkhof on the line here. We're going to be talking a bunch about software as a service, SaaS as it's otherwise known, as well as a browser that he made. Now, I'm particularly interested in the browser because I remember back in the high school days, or my high school days, we used to play with, I guess it must have been IE, like Internet Explorer, web views in Visual Basic, and you could like put buttons and controls around them to kind of make your own browser. So I'm especially interested to see, how he made this, as well as obviously the business side of things. So Kilian, welcome to the show, and take it away. What are you currently up to? What's up, and how's it going?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Well, I'm Kilian. As Matt said, I'm building a browser. Which is a very weird thing to say, given that companies like Microsoft have basically given up on building a browser and they're now using Google stuff. But I'm, still building a browser. Beyond that, I also build a bunch of other web dev related applications. And that's basically what I spent my time on.
Awesome. Yeah, great. So,
thanks, Kilian.
Yeah, so I'm interested. I'm super interested. So, I have a question. This is a really random one. Have you ever used Visual Basic?
No, I completely passed like the Visual Basic stage, I guess.
Okay.
Like most people that end up being web developers, I started out wanting to be a game developer.
Okay.
So I managed to convince my dad to buy me the Borland C++ compiler.
Okay.
And very quickly gave up on that. I remember having a book, because there weren't video tutorials back then, but I had like a book, and chapter 1 and 2 were super easy. They were like, print characters to the terminal and then exit the application. And then chapter 3 began with use bit shifting to create a chessboard. And, at that point, I just kind of gave up. And around the same time, I discovered front page. And it turned out that, building websites in front page would allow me to create something visual much quicker than whatever bit shifting was. So I just kind of made that switch and only got back to desktop applications much later.
Okay, because the reason why I ask is I know it's just kind of random, but I've been asking people as I talk to them here and there, or like developers specifically, because I remember back in my high school days, again, that was like what people said to learn on. So it was like, hey, use BASIC. It's literally BASIC, and we started with QBasic, which is I think a DOS program, and then we went to Visual Basic, which has like the visual components of like, I presume it's the .NET framework. It's like the Microsoft components, like their style buttons and such at the time. And then it just kind of faded away. And when we started talking, or when Mike said, hey, this guy's making a browser, when we were first kind of doing introductions, I was thinking, I remember doing that. And so I thought, that'd be kind of an interesting thing to ask, because I don't hear anyone, and I haven't been out of high school that long, under 20 years. And I don't hear anyone talking about like, hey, if you want to start learning to code, go to BASIC or start QBasic or whatever. I don't hear that at all anymore. So I think maybe we've moved on from that, but moved on quickly, as it seems.
Yeah. I don't know. We just never really had like BASIC at school or anything. So could also just be like a different country type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like we did go very deep into the Access database at my high school, which, is also still useless.
I was going to say, is deprecated, I think, is the last thing I heard about it. I don't know if that's true. Don't quote me on that, but.
It seems high schools really chose random languages to learn. I believe, luckily, I think the first language that I actually used in high school was HTML. So that was somewhat relative to what I'm doing now. Just building like a basic site. But then later, we also, I think, used Visual Basic. And it was already at that point super outdated. So I don't know why that was. And I mean, C++, you were using C++. That's a relevant language. I know that wasn't in high school, Kilian, but regardless, it's a relevant language. But again, it's just to start with C++.
Yeah, that was a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, at least you got an idea of the base of like how this stuff actually works on the very low end side. Our usual thing in this podcast and just with our audience is like, it's really good idea to start at the lowest level you possibly can when you're learning something. So with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, we always recommend to kind of start in the just the basic language. Like don't start with the framework, don't start with any libraries, just start with building a site or building a simple web app with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. And then when you go in and jump to different frameworks, you kind of can see how those frameworks utilize the skills that you've already learned to achieve it better, faster, easier, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. Though that's not really the path I took. Just like I basically bounced from WYSIWYG to jQuery. But I think like nowadays, it's much easier to say, you can just use JavaScript because the APIs behave exactly the same in all the browsers. Whereas, when I got started, if you wanted to do something with an element, each browser had its own special way of finding that element. And jQuery sort of papered over all of that. And actually, I recently saw they released a new version of jQuery, so that it's still going.
Oh yeah.
And I think like in terms of starting with the basics, you could do a lot worse than jQuery, and I think it can really help with like finding the mental model for how to work with HTML and CSS in JavaScript. like especially compared to something like React and Angular, which are just completely their own thing. Whereas jQuery, like in its basics, is just like find an element, then do something with the element, which is what like regular JavaScript, when you interact with the DOM, also is.
I think you're right there, like, because I remember we were trying to, like, way in the beginning when the business wasn't even really a business, realistically, we were trying to, learn JS and HTML, CSS. And the biggest hurdle, actually, in terms of our Googling specifically, was we would Google, like, hey, how do I address this, in JavaScript? Or how do I, one of the biggest ones was, how do I do this, Ajax request? And, Ajax, at least back then, was way, way easier to understand from a mental model perspective in jQuery than this like XML request and like blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, what? And like to this day, I just kind of have like a snippet I copy and then I try to change stuff because it's just like, you're not going to, unless you do that every day. It's one of those weird, like strangely, I don't know if it's changed since, but back then it's like, the way it's structured is just something I'm not going to commit that to memory since I don't use it every day,
Yeah. Yeah, but and again, that has gotten so much simpler because you no longer have to do like an XML HTTP request with subtly different headers for each browser. You can just write fetch and then the URL, and then you get that URL if you have access to it, which is like much easier. Even if you get started, like that's relatively straightforward to understand. Like I get a URL and then I can again do something with it.
Yeah. And yeah, you brought up a really good point, Kilian, and I hadn't even thought about this. The idea of jQuery back in the day was to kind of make it easier to use all these different browsers. They could obfuscate from, give you kind of an API to be able to, search through the DOM or do something else.
Yeah.
And that is really what the new style of JavaScript, ES6 or ES5, is based on, right? Like it's becoming what jQuery was already. So for us, we did the JavaScript regular path, but we quickly switched to jQuery as well in our projects. And we used jQuery and learned jQuery really well. And then going back to regular JavaScript was like really easy once all the APIs were approved, because we went through the jQuery path, because jQuery kind of started that whole like, you can get all the DOM elements in this and just put like a .css and you're good to go. Whereas before it was a little bit more complicated and you had to do it per browser. Yeah. That's a cool insight. I never thought about it like that. So props to jQuery for giving us the path to the right kind of JavaScript. Now, yes, now JavaScript has really caught up to what jQuery has. But absolutely, I love the Ajax portion of it. And fetch, in my opinion, I mean, it's pretty much what Ajax in jQuery was, right? Like fetch is better in a few different ways, and it's a little bit simpler, but it is definitely inspired.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you put like a somewhat complicated fetch or a piece of fetch code next to a jQuery Ajax call, it's more or less the same. It's like you have the URL, you have your options, which can be like, I want a GET request, I want to get JSON or XML or text, and like these header type things, and it's more or less the same.
Yeah, exactly, which is cool. So, having said that, I think now that we've talked a little bit about the origin story, which is cool, let's move on to what you're currently kind of working on and what your main focus is, which is Polypain. I've had the pleasure of actually using it over the past week or so with some of my personal projects, and it's been great. Just to give a quick overview, and I'm just going to give the base feature, sure, Kilian, and you can kind of go into some other more intricate features. But it allows you to kind of not program visually, but see your application or website across multiple different devices or device sizes or whatever. So you kind of have your mobile phone there, your small tablet, and your laptop views all present as you're coding. And if you have like, a local dev server that auto reloads when you save something in your code editor, it automatically populates on all of the different devices that you have open currently on the screen. And it's really nifty, and it also kind of carries over interactions between the devices. So if you press on a web page on one device, it'll kind of pre-populate it on all the other ones, as well as scrolling. So it saves time in that way for me right now. That's kind of the base functionality that I've seen from it. It also has some interesting dev console functionality where it kind of pops up all the requests that are happening and the logs, as far as I understand, Kilian, and you can kind of correct me if I'm wrong, right up on the screen.
That's right.
As they're happening. So, if you load a web page, a bunch of requests are happening on the web page. All of those kind of pop up for you right on top of that web page in like little bubbles. And you can kind of hover over each one, see what's going on, and see any errors that are coming back without even having to open up like the console logs or anything like that. I found that really cool as well. But having said that, I kind of want to pass it off to you to tell us, what Polypain is, and kind of give your own perspective on what you've created.
Yeah, sure. So I started working on Polypain as a side project, like in the past decade or so. I've built a bunch of desktop applications to like solve my own problems related to web development. And the particular problem that I tried to fix with Polypain was that I was getting really sick of resizing my browser all the time, because it just felt like busy work, Like I'm trying to build a web page here. I'm not trying to like manage where my browser window is. And the reason I got annoyed by that was I had recently switched over to Sketch for design work. And what you can do in Sketch, which was really neat at the time, but now everyone does it, is you can have artboards. And that basically meant you have an infinite canvas and you can put multiple artboards side by side. So I would use that to, have my mobile, tablet, and desktop view side by side. And that gave this really good overview for me of like what the site was going to be as I was designing it. And it also, like, it really shows you like where you're inconsistent in ways that you don't see if you look at them one by one. So, I was having a great time in Sketch, and then I was going back to my browser, and then I was resizing and only looking at one screen at the same time. So I created like this super simple application that was just like 3 fixed size iframes side by side. That loaded a fixed URL, my local host. And I started using that, and like I enjoyed it. But what really triggered me was that I went back and looked at my hours, and a website that used to take 20 hours now only took 8, because I wasn't doing all that like management type work. So, from there on, I just kept developing it and, getting a sort of sense of like what type of management work I don't like to do. And then getting the browser to, do that for me. So it really grew from there. I started with like 3 fixed iframes, then I made them resizable. Then I could add more. Then I added screenshots, and it just went on from there.
Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting solution to the problem. One really big thing that it helped me solve, just to jump in with this, is those issues where like you're only coding usually for one size. So you're like, okay, I've coded for mobile, now I want to code for desktop, or vice versa. And what happens with me all the time, and I'm sure many people out there, is I'll code, I'll put some media queries, I'll put some responsive tags and stuff like that. And what will happen is I'll go back to the previous size that I was coding for, and everything's going to be kind of janked, or a few things are kind of janked because I've gone and coded down.
Yeah, there's so much duplicate work when you get down to it, because like every page you add, you have to check all the other pages again in all the sizes. So it's really easy to overlook stuff, and you're constantly like resizing back or sizing down. At least that's what I was doing. And if you just see all of them all the time, then there's really no need to do any of that.
Yeah, and you catch your mistakes so quickly, right? Like, because if you go down the rabbit hole of like working on the mobile side, and you make a bunch of janky mistakes for the large side, laptop or computer size, it's going to kind of carry over. And as you go through, then you're going to have to go back and be like, okay, not only was this a mistake, but because I made this, and this, and this, it kind of starts carrying through. And that's where I saw the time savings immediately. Yeah. Like maybe in the first hour that I was using Polypain, I had that situation happen to me where I made a mistake on the mobile side that kind of carried over to the large screens, and everything was jank, but I immediately saw it. So that was one of the really big positives that I saw from Polypain right off the bat, which is kind of surprised me, because I didn't think that would be a something that it would solve, even though it's obvious.
Yeah, so that specific moment is really the aha moment I want people to experience, and that's also why, like in Polypain, one of the first features I added during the beta versions was that I started parsing the CSS myself as well. So I could extract the viewports or the media queries that websites were using. So that with one click, you could show all the media queries you were designing for. Because that very quickly tells you if you're actually going through all those media queries, and also if you're like on page 3 and you need to fix this tiny little thing because it doesn't look quite right, and you add an in-between media query. At that point, you don't realize that you might have to check your other pages again, specifically for that media query. And that just made it really obvious, like where the gaps were. And like, it's so much better to, as you mentioned, fix that in the first hour rather than, fix that after the client finds out after the website has gone live.
So I actually have a question about this then. So, like, it sounds like this is like a super powerful tool, helps with workflow, helps people that specifically web developers that want to, maximize their productivity and their workflows and all that. But what about, how do all of these features, because there are a lot, how do all these features sort of help or hurt the beginner developer? Because as a developer, when you're just getting started, your thoughts aren't there yet. Like, you're not thinking, man, I better get those 6 media queries sorted. You're just sort of like, where the hell did my hello world go? How do I get this to display? So how does Polypain help or hurt the beginning dev?
Right. So that's a really wide question, but I'll explain one of the tenets that I have for Polypain, which is that I want to be prescriptive and not descriptive. And what I mean with that is, like, if you're a web developer, there are hundreds of tools that will tell you like everything you're doing wrong. Like, right. You can just Google any random tool and it will happily tell you like all the things you're doing wrong with your website, which is useful, of course, but it can also be like demotivating and off-putting. So I think I consider that to be descriptive, whereas with Polypain, I really try to like also point out what people are doing wrong, but then immediately say like, but try this instead. So like, for example, I do color contrast checking in the browser, which is if you have a text color and a background color, you want there to be enough contrast between those two that it's comfortable to read for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some math formulas to get that right. And what most contrast checkers do is they just tell you if it has enough contrast or not. And then, you have to go back to the designer and say, hey, designer, you did it wrong. Give me a better color, which is not something you want to do as a junior developer. And honestly, also not something you want to do as a more senior developer either. And the nice thing about these colors is that it's all math, right? So you can compare the colors with a math function, but that also means that you can figure out, like, for a color, how much darker or how much lighter should it be compared to the background color to have enough contrast. So what Polypain does is, if it finds contrast issues, it calculates the color that does have enough contrast, and it suggests that color to you. So if you have like very light gray on white, it will just bump up the darkness of the text color until it has enough contrast, and it will give you that color code. And you can just, copy it into your CSS or bring it to your designer, which is a much nicer experience. You can just say, hey, my browser told me that this color would be better, which is, again, nice, because then it's not you bringing the bad news, it's the computer bringing the bad news, which is always much more acceptable. And I really try to do that, like, at every level, where I'm not just telling you what's wrong, but I'm also telling you what to do about it.
I like that. I like how it kind of plays into the almost like the office politics a bit there too, like you were mentioning. Especially if you're a junior, you don't want to go to, potentially a senior or the lead graphic designer or whoever and be like, hey man, like, we need a slightly lighter gray or darker gray or whatever we need.
Yeah.
That's interesting too. And it kind of sounds like, I mean, with all this stuff, I haven't used Polypain myself, but with all these features as well, for the beginner dev, if someone is starting out today, and let's say they get into Polypain, they install it, whatever, is there a certain configuration that maybe they should be using? Like, should they be turning off some features so they, like, hey, don't look at these 1,700 things, look at these like 10, or like what do you, or just leave everything on and it's okay, or what's your suggestion for that?
Yeah, so I think I do a pretty good job of, like, not shoving too much in your face. Like, maybe Mike can either, agree or give me some tips. Yeah, so Polypain by default starts with 3 sizes, like, just as my first prototype. And you can just use it as Chrome, right? You can just have those 3 sizes and develop your web page, and it just happens to be shown 3 times,
right,
rather than once. And you can ignore all the rest, and that will already help you, design for these different sizes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's nothing that gets thrown in your face. Just to jump in with that. When you first open it up, Matt, there's no like configuration choosing or anything like that. It's literally like 3 panes, 3 different sizes of the browser, all on one page, and you kind of go from there, and that's it. It's just like Kilian said, it's just like Chrome, but with the ability to see the 3 panes, and then you can kind of progressively activate the features that you want. My one like small suggestion would be to maybe, like, as the person is using it, show them what other features are available, or maybe have a system where they will get, some tooltip notifications every once in a while saying like, hey, notice like there's a new feature here. Because until you said that there was this feature that you could show all the media queries,
Right.
like all the site's media queries. I didn't know that until right now, even though it's like it is an icon on the top there and it's there. But as soon as I pressed it, I'm like, holy crap. Like I see literally every media query that I've made, all the different sizes are shown for me automatically. That's super useful. That's a very cool feature. So I just clicked on that and saw it real time. But in terms of for like a regular dev just starting out, I don't think there's any barrier in my opinion. I think it's just like a no-brainer for opening it up and being like, oh, that's what it does.
Yeah, so it's like one of the things that are pretty difficult for me is to find that balance between like, here are the hundreds of features that I've built and, not like scaring developers away. And also not being too aggressive in look at this, because like we as developers, we also just want to get work done and we already have like our set ways. So yeah, you don't want to change too much at once.
Absolutely. No, it's almost impossible to like lift someone out of their workflow entirely and then toss it. Like it's not like you're making this like the VS Code and a browser and right, and then people are like, whoa, I'm not changing my whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and that's like on the more like businessy SaaS side, that's always something that I'm thinking about. Like, should there be like a forced tutorial? Should I, like you said, provide tooltips? Do I have to force people to watch a little video first so that they've seen like where everything goes? And like very often I hear from developers and they say like, I always click that away. Like right away, I just press the X and I figure it out myself. Which then, tells me like I can spend a whole bunch of time making like a really cool like onboarding tutorial. But if like 1 in 10 people are going to see it even, then maybe I can better spend that time like building the next cool feature.
It's a very good point. Even if you do all this cool stuff, probably 99% of people are just going to dismiss it away, and I'm probably one of them. So
people don't read emails. This is, no, people don't even read emails. We had an incident this morning, not going to get into it, where people reading emails and stuff already. And like, this is, email's been around for a while. So, people are still not doing that. That people are definitely going to just click through tutorials as well. I guess there's like that struggle too, right? Because a lot of the time, something won't stick in your brain unless you go and you use it. And if you go through a tutorial, oftentimes it'll say like, I don't know, like an app, like a brand new app is bad for this, right? Just an app in general. It'll be like, go here, do this, that. And then at the end, I'm like, I don't know where the hell to go to press create. I'm just going to click these buttons and figure out where it is. Like, I can't remember.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tough challenge to solve, and I don't think anyone solved it perfectly. So maybe someone out there can create a SaaS app just for solving tutorial issues. There we go. But before we move on to talking about SaaS and the management side of things and creation, I just want to talk a little bit about accessibility because I know that's kind of an important topic for you. So how would something like Polypain help with accessibility?
Yeah, so I think accessibility is the bedrock for a good website. So you can have a gorgeous website, but if it's not accessible, no one's going to use it. You can have the fastest website in the world, but if it's not accessible, no one's going to use it. If your website isn't accessible 99% of the time, that also means that you're not going to be found in search engines. So like everything comes back to accessibility. And regular browsers have done a really good job of pretending that developers don't have to care about that, because like most of it will just work. Like you can add a div somewhere, make it look like a button, and it acts like a button. But then if I try to interact with that button with my keyboard, for example, I can't. So it's not accessible. And like in Polypain, I have this dual thing where I want to make it easier to make websites accessible. Because like, while there are very simple examples like the button, like, there's a literal element called button. Use that if you want a button. But on the other hand, it can also be really complicated to make a really good accessible website, especially if it's like highly interactive. And it's very easy to overlook stuff as well, like color contrast. If you have like regular vision, you can go very low in terms of contrast, and it will still look fine to you. But again, it's not really accessible. So I like, on one side, I really want to help people make it more accessible. So there's like an accessibility audit and like the color contrast we talked about. I'll give you tips in the site if you don't use the right heading structure, because a lot of people with assistive technologies rely on like a decent heading structure to go around your website. But then also, like, I want to use Polypain to create more empathy for like these issues. So for example, it's really easy to emulate color blindness in Polypain, which in itself is not like a super actionable thing, except in like very specific circumstances where you use like a certain shade of red and a certain shade of green side by side, and the difference is important. Well, if you do that, then 1 in 10 males is not going to see the difference between those colors. So that's something you want to fix. But it, like 99% of the time, that's not going to be like the problem that you're facing. But it will inform how you look at websites and how you design websites. If you know, like, some people are going to look at this amazing photograph that I've used as a header, and it's going to be completely purple. Or like some of the other stuff that I've built in are like cataracts and glaucoma, which are two it blurs the vision, but in like slightly different ways. But then also, like, other emulators that I've built in are like bright sunshine and night mode, which are things that we actually all know. Like, we all know what it's like to be outside trying to look at your phone with very bright sunshine. Tilting the phone in hopes of making it somewhat possible to read the text on the screen. And by combining that, my hope is that people become more empathetic and more easily take this stuff into account as they develop and as they design.
Where in a developer's journey should accessibility fall? Because, accessibility is important, but it's also, complex. And so someone who's, starting their journey today or has recently started their journey, where should accessibility come from? Like, should they be, let's say they do like the My First website, they build it on with whatever they're using, React or regular vanilla or whatever it is, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then should they be trying to make that accessible right away? Should you practice just consistently making sites, and then once you've mastered them, then do the accessibility? Because accessibility like features can also mess them up. Yeah, and so if you're bad at like the basics and you're bad at doing the features, now it's just a disaster, right? Like just a total disaster.
Yeah, so that's actually pretty interesting. So there's one particular part of accessibility features in browsers that's called ARIA, which are these extra HTML attributes you can add to elements to get browsers to understand them better. And the first rule of ARIA is don't use ARIA if you don't have to. And that's because if you build a website and you just use HTML, then you can make that accessible really easily, because it's just a matter of formatting your text. The most important title gets an H1 element. The second most important title, and that might be 1 or 2 or 3 titles, they get a heading 2. And you go from that. If something's a list, then you use an unordered list or an ordered list element, a UL or an OL. And if you do that, you end up with a perfectly accessible website. It's only when you don't take that into account and you start from, React, and you make everything a div, that then untangling that and making it meaningful, like making the HTML meaningful, becomes really difficult. So I think if you're starting out, you really have to look at like HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript. And one really cool concept there is the principle of least power, which is a concept that the W3C, which is the organization that came up with all of this, uses. And what that basically means is try to do something in the least powerful language. And effectively, this means like if you can do something in CSS, then don't do it in JavaScript. But if you can do something in HTML, then choose HTML, because HTML again is less powerful than CSS. A practical example of this is headings. So you can use CSS to make a certain text like big and bold and red. But you can also use HTML and wrap it in a heading 1 tag. And because you used HTML for that heading 1 tag, that text now automatically has more meaning and it's more usable for more people. So I really try to use that principle when I build stuff. And you can also see stuff shift down, which is really really exciting. So stuff that used to be just possible in JavaScript, like having elements stick to the page as you scroll, that's now in CSS with position sticky.
Mm-hmm.
And things that used to only be able in CSS, like if you hover over something or if you click something opens up or expands, that's now available in HTML with details and summary elements that already have those semantics for you, where you can click on the summary and then it expands to more text, like an FAQ style question answer thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you can also see like the languages evolve in this way, where like they see a need that's being solved in quote unquote too powerful language, and then they bring it down a level and make it available there. And because you bring it down to that less complicated language, and I would say like HTML is the least complicated, then CSS, and then JavaScript, which is not to say that like CSS is simpler than JavaScript, because it's absolutely not, but it's definitely more self-contained. yeah, so by bringing it down that level, it becomes much more manageable.
I would say I agree with all that, because, a bad habit, even of mine, is to just toss a div in. Like, I'll be like, oh, I need this section or whatever I need to make. And I just like throw a div in and start just like effectively shaping it. But lately I have found myself being like, no, like, I should do an ordered list here, or like, no, I should do, some bullet points here, or whatever it is, a numbered list, whatever. Instead, because it does make sense to just like let the HTML take it as far as it goes, the CSS as far as it goes, the JS or whatever you're using as far as it goes, rather than just like a div is great, obviously divider or whatever, but it allows you to, it's kind of like giving you a blank slate, and like you don't always have to start from there, and like it just makes more sense from accessibility and from a developer perspective to use the tools that are there rather than just reaching for like the generic tool every single time. And I think that's a really important point you made there.
Yeah, and then like the main thing there is that as you're working in a browser, all browsers will happily let you use divs everywhere, and you'll be none the wiser, because it will work for you, because you're the one building it, you have your mouse, you can click all the things, it all just works. But it's that layer underneath that makes it so that it won't work for everyone, and it won't do well in Google because you don't have the semantics, this meaning in your HTML.
And this is definitely... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I really think like browsers in general should have like more strict rules as you're developing, which is what I have in Polypain. Like Polypain will happily break in a number of ways if you have like crappy server settings or broken HTML. Whereas like Firefox and Google Chrome will try to compensate for issues you have, which is what they should do, because they're a consumer product, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your parents want to go to Facebook and they forget to type www. Then your browser will happily add that for you if needed, even if the server hasn't configured that.
Right.
Which is like what you want to happen. But as you're developing a website, you want your browser to tell you, hold up, your server doesn't actually understand what you're trying to do now, so maybe that's something you should fix. And then that should also happen, I think, for developers, like when they add images without an alt attribute, or when they add divs that act like buttons with like JavaScript on-click handlers, rather than just using normal buttons and links.
I think those are also good points, because the thing is too is, if you really think about it, the consumer product can compensate, but the consumer product always compensates in different ways. So it's like Google handles it this way. Microsoft, even though it's using Chromium, uses it, compensates it for it this way. And so, having it fixed at the root makes it the most stable, I'd say, and the most like foundationally sound. Yeah. And that just makes the most sense. That's kind of why people nowadays suggest to learn vanilla HTML, CSS, JS, rather than just jumping in, or maybe jQuery, as we discussed here and there, depending on your use case. But the point is to get as close, basically, to the browser, or an embedded program, and we say as close to the metal as you can get.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think this just kind of adds to our original advice to junior developers and people starting out of, not only do you learn HTML, JavaScript, CSS, but learn them in maybe that order. Or HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's something that I've always kind of struggled with advice, because some people are like, well, I don't really care about the layouts or something like that. So I'll just be like, okay, well, just go to JavaScript if you want to just kind of be a developer. But really, if you're going to be developing a full scale application, full stack application, you should at least understand the basics of HTML structure. And by going in and diving into the basics of HTML, you're all of a sudden learning accessibility without even knowing it. Because if you're using the button tags and the H tags and the list tags and all the different inputs in the right way without having the crutch of JavaScript or CSS to lean on, you'll learn them in the right way. You won't have to lean on the crutches. And then when you go in and start learning CSS, you're going to be styling the buttons and stuff like that, but you're going to be styling them in the right way. So I think that's a really good point, Kilian. That progression makes the most sense for someone that wants to become a full stack web developer, not a full stack, a front end web developer.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. But with that, I think let's move on to a little bit of the SaaS discussion, a little bit of your process discussion. So we've talked a little bit about how you started Polypain, why you started it. But I'm just curious, what was really the jump off point where you're like, you know what, this is a application that's going to be like, I'm going to make it a paid application. And then along with that, like, what was your process of being like, okay, should it be, a one-time payment or a SaaS or a free trial, like all of that. So just going to pass it off to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, I started this as a side project, or, just as I'm building this app to solve my own problem. And at the time I was running an internet agency. So, I had a team building websites for everyone that wanted one. But by that time I had already been doing it for over a decade. And honestly, I was getting kind of bored by it. Like there's only so many times you can explain why the color pink isn't the right color for a given website, even if they really, really like that color. So I had this going. I knew that I was like more than twice as productive with it, and I started like sharing it with friends. And they had all sorts of input as well, like the screenshots, like the screenshotting concept. And there just came a time where like 1 and 1 is 2. Like I have this really cool thing, and now I'm doing a thing that I'm good at, but I'm not really enjoying anymore. So I made the switch. Said goodbye to the agency life and started working on Polypain full time. And then what's interesting is when you do that, then suddenly you have to do all sorts of stuff that's not working on Polypain. So I had to figure out like, how do I indeed like sell the application, and then when I sell it, how do I make sure that only the people that have the application or that have a license can use the application. So I had to write my own license server and my own like business logic and backend, and then I had to build a marketing site, because you have to have a marketing site if you want to sell anything. So like as I was doing that, I figured out like what would make the most sense, like for me as well as for people using Polypain. And at the time, and now still, I have about 5 years worth of features ahead of me. And I use like customer inputs to prioritize that. But I can keep going for years. And what I really didn't want to do is, with each feature that I implemented, make this trade-off, like, do I want to put it in this version, or do I want to keep it hidden so I can put it in the next version and make that more attractive for people to upgrade or whatever? Do like a yearly update or a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 version And like, I really didn't want to do that. I when I had a feature, I just wanted everyone to have it, because, I think it would make their life better. It doesn't feel good to make that trade-off. Like, I have this feature that can be really meaningful to a lot of people, but I'm not going to give it to them because I want them to pay me again. That just didn't feel fun to me. So I figured, like, what is a model that would work, which is the SaaS model, because then it doesn't matter like how many releases I do, because anyone that's currently subscribed gets all the updates, and I can just, right now I do 1 or 2 releases each month, and like one of them will have a bunch of new features, and then the other one I'll sneak in a few extra that like didn't make the cut for the previous version. And that makes me really agile, because I can, like, for example, yesterday someone asked me for a feature that made it possible to go from the Polypain developer tools to the Chromium developer tools with a single click. So that, the element you had selected would also be selected in the Chrome Dev Tools if you want to use that instead. So yeah, I built that this morning, and I'll release it in the coming week. And I can just do that.
How do you how do you balance your time? Because from what I understand, you're a solo developer on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is your thing. You don't have a team working for you, so you have to balance your time between the feature development as well as the marketing side of things, as well as any sort of other in between, like communication stuff. How do you balance your time? Yeah. Is it like a set, I do this in the morning and I do this at night, or is it just kind of free for all?
Yeah. So one of my shortcomings still is that I really like working on the product. But I do try to get myself some sort of structure. So what I try to do is I really have like a week planning, where Monday morning is all my admin stuff. So, processing invoices, doing all sorts of, like, all the really boring stuff happens on Monday morning, because then I'll have the rest of the week where I can do more interesting things. And then per day, I really try to do, in the morning, I work on the product, and in the afternoon, I work on the rest, which can be like updating the marketing site, or writing an article, or doing outreach, or, all these things. And then, sometimes those blend into each other, or, I work a little bit longer on the product, or start a little bit earlier on, an article that I was writing the day before and just want to continue writing. And then in terms of like support, I just do that all day round, because I try to make it really easy to have people give me feedback. So there's chat in the app, there's chat on the website. I send all emails with my personal email. So, any email you receive, you can reply and it goes straight to me. There's a Slack channel for Polypain that you can hang out in. There's Twitter, of course. So I just do that in between other stuff, and that works fairly well for me, because I don't have like a huge ramp up to getting into flow. I know some people do, but I can fairly easily get back to where I was. So that's roughly what my days and my weeks look like.
Yeah, so that's really, like, it's important to understand, I think, for the people listening out there, that doing something like this on your own is definitely like a lot of work, but it's doable, right? Because I know a lot of people are scared of the fact that, oh, I'll release this application and I'm going to get bogged down with service requests and I won't be able to manage them on my own. I'm going to get bogged down with feature requests. I won't be able to manage them. I'm going to get, bogged down with bugs and all that. Like, is that something that you experienced, would you say? Or is it, as you've grown, it's kind of grown steadily, but not like a crazy spike or anything like that?
So I try to be really upfront with people. So if people have a feature request, like I can usually estimate like when I'll get to it. So I'll just, tell them, like I'm planning to do this, but probably 3 or 4 releases from now, stuff like that. Or yeah, that's a good idea. This will take me half an hour. I'll put it in the next release. And then what also really helps is I do spend a lot of time on the documentation, which is not like the most interesting work, but I personally always really like it when a tool I use has good documentation. So I figured, like, I'm a developer, I'm building something for developers. Other developers probably enjoy that as well. And I think that also cuts down on support. Like, if people can just find what they're looking for on your website and it's not hidden away or, in some slow support ticketing database system somewhere, then that really helps, I think. So you can preempt some of the stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is a full-time gig at this point. Did it start as a side hustle and become full-time, or was it something that you kind of just jumped in both feet first, no income coming from it, and you knew that, in X amount of time you were going to get income? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like I used to run an internet agency, but I left there before Polypain was a paid product. So I could spend like all my time full time, getting all the auxiliary stuff up and running, like the license server and the marketing website and all the legal stuff that's required when you have to, set up a company proper. So yeah, that took me a good few months to get set up. I did take that slowly because I have been running a company for over a decade. So I in that time I never had a vacation longer than 2 weeks. So I started my journey with a 1 month vacation, which I managed 3 weeks of, but I still count that as a win. And just went from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Us developers really suck at taking time off, I realized. like I have the same problem where like I need to take a week off or a weekend off, and I have sometimes issues not checking my phone or not checking the status of all the sites that I'm managing and stuff like that. I don't know if that's inherent to being a developer or it's just kind of like maybe the entrepreneurial mindset is too much. So
I think it's a creativity thing, and like programming just happens to be our medium. So as developers, we build stuff during the day, and then to relax, we build other stuff in the evening or on the weekends. Because we want that other stuff to exist, or it's more fun. But like when you get down to it, you're still doing the same thing, right? You're programming like both at your job and whatever thing you do on the side. But one of them is relaxation. So yeah, that's also like a balance, I think. Like sometimes working on a side project is relaxation, and then sometimes it's not. And you just have to pause it or, move on to a different side project. And that's how it goes.
Yeah. Finding that balance for the side projects to find a project that does give you relaxation is super key. I know I've definitely bit off a lot more than I could chew sometimes. And it's definitely kind of hindered some of my side projects. But when I find something that I'm genuinely interested in working on, and I just treat it very much like a side project. Like sometimes we've had an episode in the past where we're like side project for side hustle. They're two different things, right? And if you treat a side project like a side project, you can kind of get more of a lax attitude towards it. You can still be programming, but still be having fun at the same time. Or if it's a side hustle that you're kind of relying on to generate income, that all of a sudden puts this pressure on you. And now you're going from like your work, which has pressure on you, to something else on the side that has pressure on you. Yeah. And that can kind of overwhelm someone and give them, burnout and all that. So it's an interesting perspective to find that balance. Get a project that you're enjoying working on as a side project if you really like programming, and try to find it so that you're not overwhelming yourself during the day and burning out. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I realized that I'm really fortunate that like right now I don't have anyone telling me what to do, and I get to work on the thing I want to work on whenever I want to work on it. Because my side project is my project in a sense. And yeah, like for some people that might not work. Like other people might want more structure, but I don't.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, the one thing I was going to say too is it's a struggle because, and we've had this discussion on another one of our episodes too, but it's a struggle because there's some people that just are, full programming or full web development, 24/7. That's all they do. They, eat, sleep, drink, whatever, web development. But then there's other people that aren't like that, where, they do that. That's their career. That's their job. But then they, they want to do the job. And then at the end of the 8 hours or whatever, they want to go and do something else, fishing or whatever it is. Yeah. They want to go do something else. And then that's where, the struggle comes in, because they can see their peers, expanding their skill set or expanding, their side projects into side hustles or whatever the case may be. Whereas they haven't grown as much because they haven't put in the time, but it's not like they have to, it's like that weird balance.
Well, so I do think, like, when it comes down to it, I don't work much more than 8 hours a day, because at the end of the day, I'm just tired. Like after dinner, I'm tired and I need to do something else. It doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about stuff and like not constantly writing stuff down, but I'm not programming. And I'm of the opinion that I don't think you can program on the same thing for 12 hours straight. Or that if you do, you end up having to take 4 hours of the next day to compensate for the 4 hours of the day before, to, get it right again. And I've seen that happen where, people work until late into the night, repeatedly, but it only meant that they were, starting 4 steps behind the next day, because they didn't have the focus anymore. And they would have been better off, like adjusting their tempo, or at least adjusting like the hours worked. So like, I really wouldn't want to tell people that you need to code all the time to be left behind, and that in fact it might be a detriment.
Because there does come a point, like you make a really good point, because there does come a point in your work cycle where you just can't keep going. Like last night, actually, as soon as last night for me, we're just getting swamped right now, like as we said in the last episode, and I was doing, we have a client that really likes the Webflow editor, so one of his sites is on Webflow, so I was on there, and sure, it's Webflow, it's no code, whatever, but like it still takes a level of expertise and whatever, and I was sitting there, it was like 2 a.m, and I realized I had just been sitting looking at a table for 15 minutes. And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna stop, because I've effectively stopped, like involuntarily at this point. It's just, there comes a point where it's like, I'm no longer useful. I'm no longer useful here. I have to walk away. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's not even like the worst you can do. Like you can also spend 2 hours coding a function only to come back to it the next day and figuring out that, you weren't paying attention because you're just really tired. You were just really tired. And you have to redo the entire function because you didn't account for whatever you should have accounted for.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also comes down to, like, as well, if you're stuck on that function, like you're trying to troubleshoot, coming back to it in the morning or just the next day, whatever, refresh to an extent. Yeah. You can sometimes finish it in 10 minutes, whereas you were, struggling for God knows how long, an hour, 2 hours.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it is important to strike that balance and make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself, because everything is going to go down at that point. And it's important for employers as well to know that. I know I've had some issues or in the past, and I've heard of some issues where employers will expect you to work like 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week. I mean, 40 is pretty normal, but 50 and 60 in a development job is a little bit much to be coding for that long per week. So you're only kind of hurting your developers. Now, some people thrive on being able to just code, and that's fine. But the same standard shouldn't be put on everyone. Everyone kind of has their own effectiveness. And some people can be just as effective as someone in 4 hours that that does the same amount of work in like 8 or 10. So it's just important to kind of evaluate that, but it's also very difficult, obviously, as an employer or something.
It's really difficult to compare productivity between people, but I do think it's something that can be coached. I was an employer, so I've done coaching in that way. You can make people more productive. Not forcefully, but just by giving them more insights into the way they're thinking, what they're doing, and part of that is realizing that a developer can be as productive in 4 hours as they can be in 8, and for that to mean and for that not to mean that they can then do like 2 days of work in 1 day of work, but that they can do the programming stuff in 4 hours and then spend the other 4 hours doing either stuff that makes them even better or non-programming tasks that they enjoy doing or want to get better at. I think as a developer yourself, and especially if you're a junior, that's really something to be mindful of as well. Like, you don't have to program 8 hours a day. There's other stuff you can do to also bring value to the company. And you can get to that by making yourself more productive, and then making yourself more productive is not always like typing faster, but it's usually just like working smarter. Like if you're a junior developer, don't ask something if you've been stuck on something for an hour. Ask something if you've been stuck on something for 5 minutes. Maybe 5 minutes is not long enough, and then try 10 minutes. But it's stuff like this where, especially as a junior, you have to realize that everyone else that works at the same company is there to help you. So make use of that. And by doing that, you'll become more productive as well.
Yeah. That's good advice, because I know a lot of juniors and a lot of new developers, and even old, like senior developers, myself included, have an issue asking for help. Like I always ask for help essentially in the last grasp.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I've, on the third page of Google, that's when I know I need to ask for help.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of my metric, but sometimes that could be like, an hour or two, when I could just go to the forum, ask like a developer that I know, and they could point me in the right direction. Because it's not always like, when people ask for help, another thing that they should realize is that it's not always going to be like, oh, this is exactly what the answer to your question. A lot of the time, a developer will help you find the answer to your question faster, not just give you the answer. And that's in itself is a really important skill to pass on, that finding the answer part. So that is something that you can accelerate quicker if you're going to ask for help, because people are going to show you their process of figuring out the answer. So like if you ask someone, a developer, a question, if they don't know it right away, they'll be like, oh, let me see how I Google it. And then take a look how they go through the process of finding the answer. And then you can apply that to your own problems.
Yeah. My one advice would be really make that time dependent. So make sure you're aware when you get stuck, because that can be difficult to be aware of as well when you're a junior developer. Like you don't know if you're stuck, or you just don't know how to do something. But make it time dependent. Say, I'm stuck now. If I'm still stuck in 15 minutes and I haven't made progress, I'm gonna ask someone. And just stick to that 15 minutes, even if it feels like too short, and even if it feels like you think it's something you should already know. Make the feedback cycle smaller is basically what it is.
Yeah, cool. I might even use that advice, to be honest. Cool. And so just to kind of, we're nearing the end of our conversation here, but I do want to talk a little bit about the tech stack behind Polypain. So I'm wondering if you can kind of take us through how you're running it.
Yeah. So Polypain is built on Chromium, which is what Google Chrome also uses. And it's built on Chromium using the Electron framework. And Electron basically takes Node.js and Chromium and smashes them together. And that allows you to make desktop applications, because the Chrome part lets you render a UI as web pages. And then the Node.js part lets you communicate with the operating system. And I had been building desktop apps for quite a while before I started using Polypain. Long time ago, I used to do that in Python, because that was like one of the more accessible ways to build desktop UIs. And then like shortly there came a bunch of desktop frameworks that were using web technologies. And then Electron is one of the more recent ones, and that came out of the Atom text editor by GitHub. And I really liked using that, because it was even simpler than writing Python or some of the other web-based stuff that was out there at the time. So I wanted to do something with Electron. Is basically what drove me to try this out. And then the other thing I wanted to do something with was React, which at the time was at version 0.13. So this was a while ago. So I combined the two, started working on it, and like to this day, that's basically the tech stack of the application. So it's built in Electron. All the browser UIs is using React. And then I've just, strung JavaScript throughout all the stuff that I'm writing. So the license server is in JavaScript. The marketing site is written in Gatsby, which also uses React to make static websites. And that helps me keep in the same mental model, no matter what part I touch or what part I work on. So that's really nice. And then in terms of UI, I don't use any UI frameworks for Polypain. So it's all like just custom elements and CSS. Because at the time there was nothing really that worked well everywhere. So Polypain works on all 3 operating systems. So no, there's more, but it works on the 3 major operating systems, so Mac, Windows, and Linux. And there were a couple of really nice frameworks that you can use to make Electron apps that look just like macOS applications. But if you run that on Windows, it would look terrible next to all the other applications. And then the same for when you run it on Linux. So instead, I wrote a custom UI. And that's basically the tech stack. It's pretty flat.
Which Linux distros do you specifically design for, like Ubuntu or?
So I've been a Ubuntu user for I think 15 years now. So I built on Ubuntu, and then that means that it also works on anything related to Ubuntu. So Linux Mint, Elementary, Debian even. But I also export to an app image, which is like a little self-contained application, and that can run basically anywhere.
Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it was really important for me to have the app be available everywhere. Because I have all 3 operating systems because I need to test on them, but also because I think it's good to have access to all of those. And Mac users get the best apps, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to make an app just for Mac. I want my apps to be used everywhere. And somewhat selfishly, I want to be able to develop the app on my favorite operating system, which happens to be Ubuntu.
You don't want to start the OS wars in this place. We've had a couple episodes where it's just been a massive OS war. Who's best? I don't know where Mike sits now, but I'm a full Microsoft guy all the way for everything. So I got Windows everywhere, and if I had to use a Mac, I would use it in the cloud. And I don't like Linux unless I'm using a server. So like it just lighten the match in here. You got to be careful. Okay.
Well, like as I said, I use all 3.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I have a preference, but we'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
it's the most diplomatic war we've ever had.
Diffusing the situation immediately.
One kind of selfish question, just because I've always wondered it. With Chromium, when you build on top of Chromium, and especially when you're building a browser on top of it, do you have to handle the updates to Chromium that happen every second that it seems? Or does Chromium itself kind of get updated automatically on your end? How does that work?
No, so that's linked to the Electron version. So each Electron version will be linked to a major Chromium version. So right now, the latest release of Electron is on Chromium 89, which is also the latest Chromium release. So they go more or less hand in hand. They release on the same day. And then, there will be patch releases for Electron when there's patch releases for Chromium. And the reason Electron does this is because then you don't have a moving target. Like once you ship the app, you're guaranteed a particular rendering engine.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah, definitely.
And because you're a desktop application, you already have much more access to the operating system than a browser. So So yeah, for security updates are important, of course, but it's not like Chromium where there's like access escalation, because there already is, like very crudely said.
Yeah, you're also not designing for the masses, like, you know.
No.
You're designing for developers, so it's not as important with to be super up to date. But does it?
Well, so it's like it's not super important to be on the latest patch release, but I do think it's really important to be on the latest Chromium release. So I try to be like within a few days of each major Chromium release with Polypain as well. Because of course we are developers, and when we know that Chromium, for example, has aspect ratio in CSS, we want to play with it, right? So yeah, I really try to have Polypain be up to date with Chromium whenever I can.
That makes sense. Is it a pain to update, or is it usually really smooth? Like, just, you know.
It depends on what's in the updates. I've gotten pretty good at it, I think. Given that I can release like on or slightly before the Chromium release, because like a Chromium release will have been out for a while as a beta before it's crowned stable. But like it really depends on the change set.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's good. It's good to know, regardless, that your app is constantly updated, especially because it's a developer tool. You want to be kind of on the latest Chromium for sure. And I was just wondering again how that whole process is. I thought it would be more of like a nightmare, but I guess it's a little bit more at least adaptable. Like you can eventually adapt to it.
Yeah. So that if you look at, for example, like the Brave browser, they use Chromium directly, and then and that includes the Chromium UI, which they've made changes to and patches to. So I think they have a harder time than me, because I really only need like the Chromium rendering engine. Like I don't take any of their UI. I don't need any of their UI specific changes. I just need them to render a page, which I think makes it slightly simpler.
It's interesting. I mean, you think it would be counterintuitive, right? Because you're the one that has to maintain the whole UI, but because of that, you don't have to worry about updating their UI stuff on your end. Whereas
Exactly.
Edge Chromium and Brave Chromium, they kind of rely on Chrome's UI a little bit, so that's why they're a little bit lagging behind always. I believe Edge Chromium lags behind. Still, does it not?
No, Edge is pretty good, but Microsoft has a pretty large team nowadays working on Edge.
Yeah, I could imagine. Not just one person.
No.
So yeah, that's cool though. I think we're going to be wrapping it up now. Kind of going to pass it off to you to do any sort of self plugs that you have, or any sort of farewell messages that you have to our listeners.
Yeah. So if any of this sounded interesting, please try out Polypain. You can get it at polypain.app or polypain.com or polypain.dev, because I'm also a compulsive domain buyer. You can try it for free for 14 days. So that's more than enough time, to take it for a spin and to try it out. I'm at Kilian Valkhof on Twitter. My own personal site is kilianvalkhof.com. So feel free to reach out if you have questions or feedback or feature requests for Polypain. I'm always happy to talk and to hear ideas.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the insight and conversation. And to the listener out there, everyone go check out Polypain, and make sure you give that a go and learn those accessibility development skills as well, with a little bit of help from Polypain as well, as we discussed. And thank you, Kilian, for being on the show. And
thanks for having me.
No problem. And we'll hopefully have you back in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Kilian.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as we did. A bunch of great insights in there, a bunch of visual basic knowledge. Sure, I lost my train of thought, but a bunch of visual basic knowledge, not a bunch. There's like 2 questions in there as well, but a bunch of SaaS talk, a bunch of stuff about Polypain, and a lot of good insights there. So hope you enjoyed that. But moment of anticipation, moment of truth, maybe. The weekly growth goal. Mike, please, sir, tell us all about how complete your weekly growth goal is.
You bastard. You set me up to fail. I'm blaming it all on Matt. He caused me to fail my weekly growth goal. It was only and all on his shoulders, but no. So my last weekly growth goal was to create show notes for older episodes. So I was going to create a show note for the recent interview we had with Monarch and post them on dev.to. And my idea is I want to create like a template that I can follow for all the other episodes, so I can kind of slowly put them all on dev.to until we have our website up. I did get it started, but I didn't finish because what happened was I had a bunch of other writing that I had to do. I have to answer some questions, and then I also had to create these show notes with Kilian. So that kind of took priority, and I'm still going to be working on those show notes. I do want to get that like a solid template done so that it becomes easier as I go, of just kind of, this is what I do to create the show notes, and this is what I do to post them and stuff like that. So I am going to invest a little bit of time into that this week and hopefully have the first show notes up and posted by next week.
All right. Well, I mean, I didn't say you up for failure. You did that to yourself, but I'm not much better. Got to slide that little insult in there. I'm not much better because I don't know what my weekly growth goal was. I don't remember what it was last week, but I have good reason, and that's because we are getting slammed with work here. Like I said, the famine is on the horizon, but the feast is in due course. I don't know if that's how you. That sounds very like medieval times. It sounds like trying to talk like a king in like a castle in like a weird movie or something. But the feast is currently happening, and it's overflowing. It's just too much. Luckily, though, I was able to finish some stuff just completely. So we had a couple of projects. We still do, but we had a couple of projects on the go, and the goal, maybe this was my weekly growth goal. See what I mean? I'm just all over the place. Was to complete 50% of each of the 2 projects, each of the 2 big ones, last week, and then come in and do, or maybe that was 2 weeks ago. See, this is a disaster. You
got to record it. I've got to get this app done, the weekly growth goals app, so you can start monitoring and recording your weekly growth goals.
Like, I mean, it's no joke. I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, the point of the matter is, one of the 2 projects, I was trying to shoot for 50% of both of them to be completed. One of them is actually complete. I just have to do the training portion of it. I'm not going to get into what they are, but it's a client project. The second one is at about, I'm going to say 70%. I'm almost done all the structure and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going to go do and put I'll make this border nicer. This doesn't load right. A little bit of responsivity problem here, etc. So I'm going to go and I'm going to fix that later. So I'm going to say 70% of that done. But another project came in our laps, which is more logistics than anything else. I had to learn a couple things, whatever, because I wasn't sure on a couple things, which I learned, whatever, that's fine. But it's just a matter of like communication, which of course just takes time in due course. Said it again. And so that's where I'm at. So I am all over the damn place. I realized that I was supposed to join a couple of Discords and I just didn't. I didn't remember to do, although it's early anyway here, but like I didn't remember to do my personal taxes. Like someone was supposed to call me and I don't even know when. I just realized I didn't write down an appointment I got this week. So like it's not looking good. It's not looking good for me or my weekly growth goal or whatever. All I'm doing at this point is we're just at a point where I got to grind and just get stuff done, finish that 70%, let's say, and whatever. So I don't have a specific goal other than this week, other than to basically keep my head above water because I got a bunch of stuff that just needs to get done at different paces based on communication and blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to try to get a whole bunch done. The good news is that I believe we're growing. Mike and my company, I think, is growing at this point. Usually it's like I got one project on the go and then like another project kind of slides in and that's what screws me over. This is like I got two on the go and then one slid in and like there's actually another one coming in as well. So I think we're kind of growing, whether this is just like a fad or whatever, I don't know. But I mean, one can hope because we also got maintenance of a bunch of other people's stuff, which is, we're kind of trying to keep them above, but like keep their sites up, whatever, and do whatever maintenance needs to be done there as well. So there's a lot going on. So I ain't complaining. I'm just saying. I don't know. But yeah, so I don't have weekly growth goal other than to keep my head above water this week. And I don't know if that's worse. You know what? Mike's situation was worse. I'll just say that. Mike's performance.
First of all, I was going to be supportive of you and be like, that is a good weekly growth goal just to survive. But now I'm just going to shit on you and say that, no, your situation is worse.
What?
You failed
wait
horribly.
Wait a second here. We can rewind. In this case, we can literally rewind the tape. And then you could say the good stuff, and then I can just rip on you later. Like, I could just edit it in where it's like, man, Mike sucks, whatever. And then, but yeah, that's what's going on. Oh, also, I also forgot, this is crazy too. Crazy for us. We recorded a web news last week. I forgot we did literally entirely. And then I was sitting on, like, this is after work, I was sitting on my Xbox talking to a friend and I was like, we recorded a web news and I don't even know what the status of that is. Like, it's done. Like, it's recorded, but I don't think I edited it. I don't even know where it is. So, oh yeah, it's, it's going well. So, anyway, got to get a couple of these projects out of the way, get them done as quickly as I can at the quality that we would like to, just so that they get out of the way. And that's just about it on that. So, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Hope you enjoyed this weekly growth goal banter and whatnot. And remember, if you want to support the show because you liked it so much, because I know you did, that's patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the tiers, give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons, of which you could be one of them. Sean from RabbitWorks JavaScript on youtube.com/RabbitWorks JavaScript. Garrick from Local Path Computing and Web Design on localpathcomputing.com. Ryan Gatchell from Blue Black Digital on blueblackdigital.com. Chris from Selfmade Web Designer on selfmadewebdesigner.com. Tim from The Web Hacker at thewebhacker.com. DL Ford from dlford.io. Babe Hashdash from 9block Media on 9blockmedia.com. And Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, where you can also find our show. I also was supposed to do something for Jason, and I forgot to do that. So if you're listening to this, Jason, now you know what happened. But anyway, feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform you're listening to this on. Hopefully I remember to answer those comments. And we are signing off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.